All right, welcome back to Watch This with Rick Ramos. As always, this is your host Rick Ramos. As always, my co-host Mr. Ibrahim Chavez. We're here to examine some of the best in cinema over the hundred and some odd years of films as they've been making, as they've been produced and delivered to you. As I've said in the past, and as we've spoken many times over the last 6 or 7 years, one of the great things about film is that one of the great things about film today, with all of its problems, with all of its limited current creativity, we have the opportunity to go back and see many, many movies through streaming services, through boutique Blu-ray and DVD services like Criterion, Olive, Shout, Scream Factory, Arrow, Kino Lorber, all of these places. So the next couple of months, last week we started with Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein. This week we're going to be looking at Nicholas Roeg's 1973 classic, starring Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, a film that has been talked about for numerous years as a horror masterpiece. I'm talking about Don't Look Now. Now, this is a film that I've been wanting to see for quite some time. It's a film that's been on my list. It's a film that I wanted to get into. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past. Expectation versus delivery. I really did think this was going to be more of a straight up horror film, and I was taken aback. And I was a bit intrigued because it didn't go in that direction. I can't say that it was true horror for me, but it was something a little bit more. It was something a little bit more disturbing because it was so real in some sense. The central idea is Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland play a married couple whose daughter has died, whose daughter is drowned in a pond outside of their home. This is the first 7 or 8 minutes of the film, maybe 10 minutes of the film. And the ensuing film is the dealing with that death, but also the attempt to move on with life, but all of that coming back on them. So we're going to get into every aspect of that film. Let's just say right now, as always, we talk about all aspects of the film. We don't hold back. We don't. So if it's a film that you've been wanting to see, if Don't Look Now is something that's been on your list, we both advise that you stop the podcast now, watch the film, and then come back to listen to our analysis, because that's the best way to really get an understanding of the whole picture. So at this point, you had never heard of this film, correct? Or had you heard about it?
I had heard of it, but I hadn't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And most likely what you had heard about it was the infamous sex scene. Am I right? Or
Right.
is it okay? So
Yeah.
so tell me what you had heard and what you took from your initial viewing.
All right. Well, I am somewhat familiar with Nicholas Roeg, not a lot. I'm familiar with Performance.
You've seen it?
16, yeah,
Okay.
69, 70s film, Mick Jagger.
Mm-hmm.
So he directed, and the reason I know about that film and I was interested is because of like my interest in rock and rock history and my interest in occultism.
Mm-hmm.
So he co-directed, Nicholas Roeg co-directed Performance with Donald Cammell. And Donald Cammell was the son of Charles Cammell, who was a biographer and associate of Aleister Crowley, the occultist. Aleister Crowley. Donald Cammell, who co-directed Performance, plays Osiris in Kenneth Anger's Lucifer Rising. So they were in that circle of the Rolling Stones, Anita Pallenberg, Marianne Faithfull, this kind of like rock and roll meets occultism meets film in the late 60s, early 70s. So that's how I knew about that film. And then I had seen the man who fell to Earth.
Mm-hmm. The
from
David
70s,
Bowie film, right?
David Bowie, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he's an alien. So I saw that, and then I had seen Walkabout. Also, I had rented that, but I've seen it years ago. All these I've seen a while back, but Walkabout was like VHS, like so many years ago. But I hadn't seen this, but I knew that this was kind of in between those films, right? And I had heard that it's like on the list of films that feature a sex scene that's supposed to be not simulated, but it's real, an actual sex on film.
Yeah.
And I knew that it was some kind of thriller. So that when you mentioned let's do this, when we were talking about what films we would cover for this Halloween season, I was intrigued because I wanted to finally cross that bridge, you know?
Yeah. So what did you think?
Oh.
I mean, what was your take on it? Oh, you wanted to add something to that?
No, that's the second question. Yeah. I thought it was refreshing that it went in a different direction, that it was I didn't know what to expect, but I am glad that it kind of was something new, something different, something. First of all, the majority of the film takes place in Venice, Italy, and I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of being in Venice, and Venice is a crazy, weird place. It's like a magical place. It's one of those cities that you go there, you hear about it and it's kind of like, yeah, okay, well, blah, depending on what you hear.
Yeah.
But then you go and you experience just the light of that city at different points in the day is different. And, it's a city of canals, city of water, a city that's slowly sinking. And it has all this like rich old history. And you're walking around getting lost. And you're like, who the fuck would have thought that someone would have made a city, that people would have developed what developed into Venice here? It just defies kind of, because it's so unique and so different.
Yeah.
And it has such a character to it. Aside from the visual, it's spatially so unique because it's got these labyrinthine streets that they lead to, you don't know where you're going. They lead to just these dead ends of like water. It's all these alleyways. You can make this one turn through these narrow alleyways and you can end up in a churchyard. But it's like surrounded by walls. And then there's just like another opening over there in the opposite corner. So you go through there and then now you're in this more open space. So you kind of have to like learn to orient yourself. And eventually, if you're there enough days, you kind of do. And so it's like, there's a sense of breathing because like you're walking and then the area will become more narrow and then it'll open up. So it's almost like inhalation, exhalation type of thing.
Yeah.
And you do it at different times of the day or the night. And there's touristy areas, obviously, because it's Venice. And those areas fucking suck because people like you who are visiting kill it.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
No, I know.
And when all of you congregate, it's fucking like it's there's something gross about it. But if you go deeper and further away from, like, the Grand Canal and all that shit, now it's more of the romance and the mystery. It's Lord Byron with his Bridge of Sighs. It's Casanova who lived there. And so now you're looking at something like this in a film where the city is a character. It's difficult because it's kind of like, it's hard to watch something like that presented to you on a screen, which is flat, when the character of a city, especially a city like Venice, is very spatial because it's immersive. It's not just, I'm driving by fucking Hollywood Boulevard, or I'm walking along this fucking street that has stars on it, and it feels more superficial. This is like, no, you're plunged into this fucking maze. And it's very inspirational. I'm working on a project that involves kind of the shadow of that. So to watch it on a screen, it's beautiful, but at the same time, it's like, well, you know that it's not the same. And then you ask yourself, well, how close will we ever get to capturing Venice in film? I've seen scenes of Vampire in Venice or Nosferatu in Venice, the notorious film with Klaus Kinski, which maybe we'll do next year.
Yeah.
It has moments of that dark beauty of Venice. But then there's this film at night, in the day and in the night, but especially in the night towards the end of the film, where it's really like, it's almost like you're in this fun house. And Venice is also notorious or known for, like, its masks. When people used to wear masks, like, just wear masks in Casanova's time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the persona of the city. So that adds all to the mood of the film. So it's basically a film starring Venice, Donald Sutherland, and Julie Christie. And so having said all of that, there's those expectations of a horror film, but now adding the dark mystery and the romance and whatever of Venice. But then to take a step back and say, well, this isn't horror, maybe like how you explained it, like what you would expect. It's more psychological.
Yeah.
But then you look at it as you're in this mode. If you're a film watcher, you see that the technical editing, it's an editing masterpiece.
Oh, it's insane how good it is. And I think part of the problem in watching it is how often the film has been mimicked and has been. It's one thing to see a film for the innovation that it is. It's another thing to be overwhelmed by everything that has come after, so that Roeg's work in this film doesn't seem as novel as it actually is. But there's a level of cross-cutting, playing with time, and it's not in your face. It's not in your face in the way that it's like fancy camera work or a need to really wow your audience. It's editing that really serves the purpose. It's editing that goes back to the Eisenstein theory of editing making a commentary on itself, where in the early days, Eisenstein would show the mistreatment of the working class, the workers during a strike. I think in the movie Strike, and he would cut to imagery of farm animals and that kind of thing. It's heavy-handed, but it was the early vocabulary of filmmaking, and I think Roeg does something similar, but far more nuanced to show. And we're going to get into the sex scene, but I don't want to overwhelm the episode with that, but it'd be impossible to talk about this film without talking about the sex scene. But to do a sex scene in the way he did it, and to cut back and forth with, to parallel edit the sex with the getting ready right after sex, to leave, to go out, to do something, it makes it a little bit less personal in a weird... Well, no. It makes it a little bit less personal while at the same time making it more humanistic, where it's... it's a very interesting scene because you get the impression that this is a couple that have not made love in months, maybe a year, maybe you have no idea how long it is between the death of their daughter and the work that Donald Sutherland's character is doing in Venice at this time. But you know that this is a strained
restoring a church.
Yeah, he works on mosaics and he's an art historian and of such. He's it's the struggle for the survival of a marriage. And it's not overdone. A lot of films would have had Julie Christie in bed, crying all the time, sleeping all the time. These people have moved on in their lives in the way that you have to move on in order to survive something like this. And yet, the horror of losing a child, which most people would say is probably the worst thing that can happen to a parent, that can happen to you. It is definitely overwhelming. It's definitely something that that has hung over them, that has stayed with them, that is making their life difficult. And there's a tenderness between Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, who I don't think knew each other that well before this film. If you watch if you have the Criterion Blu-ray of this film, there's interviews with both Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, Nicholas Roeg, and the editor and cinematographer of the film. Very insightful 15, 20-minute pieces when they're just talking about the making of this film. And by a lot of standards, this film is held up in such high regard. It's considered one of the great horror films, and one of the great British horror films, up there with The Wicker Man, which neither of us particularly cared for. But this one, I can see why it is something that is revered. Although I'm not... Tell me if you felt this way. I was not in fear at any moment of the film. I was never on the edge of my seat as far as what's going to happen. I was intrigued by the film, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you mentioned here, but
yeah,
I've been
rambled.
I've been kind of playing with that idea of like, well, how much of horror is actually scary?
Yeah.
How much of horror films are actually scary versus creating a mood?
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe, these movies that we call thrillers are movies that are more, and it doesn't even, it necessarily doesn't have to be a so-called thriller. Action movies can do this too. It's kind of like, well, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
In a different sense than a regular film where you're like, well, are they going to get back together or not?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Is it going to be this or is it going to be that? Is it this, what's going to happen? Versus like, okay, what's going to happen when they turn that corner?
Yeah.
What's on the other side of that corner? What's on the other side of that door? I think that's more, in that sense, Hitchcock is that kind of master.
Yeah, definitely.
Something that has more, of a mystery genre is more of that, where it's like, whoa, what the fuck? Versus horror, I think a lot of times it's more just an overall mood, an overall tone that we want to step into, where it's like, yeah, I want to watch something creepy. I might end up laughing more than I am afraid, but it's still in that mode. There's a nostalgic aspect to it. So I think it's different. A lot of times it's cheesy. A lot of times horror.
A lot of times,
campy.
Yeah.
And all of it is going together. This is, it's not scary, but it is disturbing because it's going back to the editing. It's kind of like, not only does it use metaphor in terms of visual motifs, the color red, and all that represents blood, etc. The daughter's like
red coat,
her red like raincoat or whatever, broken glass, water, visions that aren't literal but are representational, symbolic. The film uses visual cues, and the editing, but not just in a way that affects the story. For example, like Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is famous and well known for the way that the editing conveys the story. It's not linear. Or think of Godfather 2. It goes forward, it goes backwards, but it alternates. Tarantino does what it does. Pulp Fiction, Tarantino does what he does. These are editing as storytelling. What I think Nicholas Roeg is doing is he's conveying a philosophy of time through his editing.
Yes.
I don't think that Tarantino is saying, well, this is how I feel about time as a concept in the world, and I'm going to show you that in my movie. I think Tarantino either figured out or went into it with this sense of like, I'm going to tell this story in this way, and the telling of it in that way is what actually elevates it to, I think, masterpiece level. Pulp Fiction. Had it been just linear, it wouldn't have had the same magic. Nicholas Roeg, I think, is doing in his way what the Tarkovskys of the world are doing, what the Tarbellas are doing, or Bellatars are doing with so-called slow time, where they're making, I think they're presenting a philosophy of time that they're using cinema as a medium to affect the viewer and to convey their sense of time to the viewer, as uncomfortable as it can be, or as meditative, or as however one takes it. Roeg is saying time is not linear. You have parallels of time. You have things that are happening. For example, you talk about the sex scene intercut with the putting on of the clothes. That is not just to tell the story. That's also, when you said it makes it in a way more impersonal, it's like, well, go back to the sense of Venice with the breathing. Go back to the sense of you cut, let's pretend you're walking down a narrow pathway and then cut, and now you're walking into a more broad pathway, and then cut, now it's more narrow, now it's more broad. That can give you it's a rhythm.
Yeah.
If you go back to the idea of Venice and people wearing masks, it's the same thing like clothes. The mask is the word for mask is persona. Going back to the Greek, that's this is who we reveal ourselves to be by the masks that we wear and the masks that we remove. The same thing with our clothes. In there's a woman who's blind who's psychic, so she can't see, but she has her second sight, right? She sees the little girl alive, but the little girl is dead. So it's kind of like all of that is the metaphor. Like, cut between a shot of the girl laughing, cut between a shot of them thinking about her or in the aftermath or whatever. She's dead, she's alive. She's alive, she's dead. It's kind of like parallelism. So you don't know, when you're looking at something in this film, you don't know if it belongs to their present or their past. And the thing is that neither at times do they. And that's how disorienting grief is what Nicholas Roeg is saying. And that's how disorienting time is what Nicholas Roeg is saying through this film. Mm-hmm. And in the way that you're disoriented going through the canals, whether you're on a gondola or you're going through these streets, that's how grief disorients you when you try to look at things and you try to, like, especially the more recent they are. Anyone who's ever lost someone, you know that as time goes on, you get a sense of distance and you get a sense of proportion and you get a sense of kind of like, you can make, in your mind, you can make sense of it more. And so it affects you less. Whereas when it's fresh, you don't know which way is up, you don't know which way is down, because, and you don't even know how you're supposed to feel about it. Or sometimes you know how you're supposed to feel about it, but you don't know if the feeling that you're feeling matches what you think you're supposed to feel it enough. And so it's all of these different layers. So that's the actual horror. And then behind all of that is this idea of like, well, Donald Sutherland is supposed to, he's taking care of his wife because they're both dealing with the death of the daughter, but they're now in Venice doing this work. But she meets these women who are telling her about their daughter. And as Julie Christie's character is becoming more invested in these visions, but she's becoming more affected by it. Now he's trying to like nurture her and caretake for her and all this and that. In the background, though, there's a serial killer. But it's so in the background that it's just kind of like, well, it's just incidental, because what's actually in the foreground is what's in the past, which is the death of his daughter. And now you have premonition, which is like, now he himself is getting flashes of a future that he doesn't realize, he doesn't know what it is.
Well, and
then eventually, go ahead.
No, they talk about his having the gift, but that in some cases they fight it. And Roeg described it as the battle between a female and a male sensibility, where a woman would dive into that and embrace it. Maybe it's the motherly instinct, maybe it's a misogynistic thing that he was going at it with, but that and that's my reading right there. But the Donald Sutherland character, John, would be more of rational and not trusting of whatever he sees. I mean, in the beginning of the film, he almost immediately gets a sense that something is wrong. He feels that his son has broken a mirror, a glass, writing over it. And they live in the country. They're near a pond. The little girl is playing with a ball and ends up in the pond. He senses that. He doesn't know what he feels, but there's a forebodingness. There's a feeling that there is something wrong right now, and there is a danger to his family. He rushes out and he He sees the sun. He realizes what's happening. He dives into the water to pull his daughter out. And then you have that, oh my God moment where, you lose a child. That scene is not in the original short story by Daphne what the hell is her name? Daphne
Du Maurier, something like that.
Daphne du Maurier, yeah. In the book, in the short story, actually, she dies of meningitis, and it's off screen. It's after it's everything that's taking place basically while they're in Venice, and this brings it home. This drives it. This is a very powerful opening to a film that sets up everything that will come after it. What struck me as difficult to process is that the majority of films that would deal with this type of story would have played up the tragedy a great deal more. You would have Donald Sutherland's character either an insomniac or an alcoholic. Julie Christie's character would be in bed all day long. This is typical of what you would see in this type of film. And everything about this film goes against the grain of how these stories are usually played out. They are back to their life. He is working. She is with him in Venice. She is working on her aspect of whatever their partnership is. They have sex again. The sex is well, we'll get to that. But then this thing comes at him, and she doesn't get hysterical, but she does have that feigning moment, which I thought was beautifully achieved, where she comes out of she meets these two women, two sisters, one blind, very creepy. If you want to do a creepy blind woman scene, have a woman with glossed over eyes, like cataracts that have just been completely out of control. That is freaky. Don't put the glasses on them. Freaky. And they have a discussion in the bathroom.
They're nice.
In the beginning, you don't know that.
Well, I know, but
in the beginning, you don't know what's going on.
The nicer they are, it's almost the creepier it is. And
it is very creepy, but it's also
there's a Rosemary's Baby aspect to them too.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's a certain vocabulary of filmmaking where nobody is good. Anybody who is too good, you have to be aware of. You have to be afraid of. So in a weird way, I think Nicholas Roeg knows this. I think Roeg understands and recognizes how these characters have played out in previous films, and he goes against the grain, but he doesn't set you at ease right from the get-go. He allows the story to tell itself. And then you realize that as it's happening. And you realize, oh my God, these women are okay. And this woman does have the gift. She can see. And she just wants to help the Julie Christie character, and she wants to help the Donald Sutherland character. But and justifiably, he doesn't want to go to these places. He wants to move on with his life. The daughter is dead. When Julie Christie says, our daughter, I can't remember the daughter's name. Christine. She's happy with us. She's safe. She was with us. She was sitting with us. And Donald Sutherland says, she's dead. She is dead. It's so matter of fact and it's so blunt, but I don't know how else that you could realistically play that, because it would be. I recognize the Donald Sutherland character, and I imagine that that's how I would react to this type of situation, where it's like there's a realistic sensibility of understanding that our daughter is gone and she's never coming back. And you can't die with the child. You have to move on. You have to move forward, which is what he's doing. But in doing so, he ignores all of the warnings. He ignores all of the possible readings of the situation because he's too caught up in the realistic truth of what or our lives. There are no ghosts. We cannot communicate with the past. We cannot look into the future. None of this is possible because we don't want to believe it is. We're too caught up in what we know to be true, when the truth is, at least in the world that Roeg creates, there is that connection to the afterlife, to the daughter. And it's very subtle. It's played very subtly. This is one of those instances where now I want to see a director's other work. I want to see Walkabout. I want to see performance. I want to see. I want to go back to the Witches. I want to see some of the. I want to see the one Bad Timing and Insignificance. I think he's an interesting director. I think based on this film, which I didn't initially. Have you ever had a movie watching experience where you thought it was going to be something else? It didn't deliver. You were somewhat disappointed, but then you continue to play the movie back in your head.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like I'm in a relationship with a person who is technically, like, supposedly not my type.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I am definitely not, on paper, her type. But we bring things, whatever, that are weird and refreshing and sometimes annoying and all that other shit enough that it's just like, wow, this is like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
This is very strange. But obviously you keep playing it, as you said, you keep watching, you keep going with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where I'm like, I keep looking at it from a technical aspect, and that just leads me into liking it more on an emotional level and on a mood level and on what it creates. Because it's like, again, this is a masterclass in filmmaking. It's a masterpiece of editing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sound design. He makes it look simple, even though you're looking at it and you're going like, wow, like this is, to make that choice to put this in the beginning of the film. There's like red falls over the side, and it's a foreshadowing of the end of the film. And you don't know if this is just kind of inspiration, if it's happening in the editing, if he wanted to do this the whole time, but you're just like, brilliant to see that. The mood that it creates, that tone, that what he's able to do, that De Palma likes to, those places that De Palma likes to go, that Polanski likes to go, that Hitchcock went. Ultimately, so that when you arrive at the ending and all of these areas, all these warnings, all this shit converges in Julie Christie's character and Donald Sutherland's character, each trying to find each other. And you're kind of like, one leaves and the other one arrives because he's looking for her, but now she's coming back looking for him because she knows that he's looking for her where she was. And then ultimately he sees who he thinks is his daughter. in the distance, and he's following her, and it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, where he's just going deeper and deeper, chasing this specter.
Mm-hmm.
And he's using the language of almost of the because it also becomes like this kind of like Little Red Riding Hood kind of thing. And he's like, I'm not going to hurt you. And usually the person who says I'm not going to hurt you is the one who's going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And little does he know that it's like, no, motherfucker, like, she's going to hurt you. That's not your fucking daughter. So that when the lady turns, it's who he thinks is his daughter wearing this red, shiny raincoat, hooded raincoat,
Mm-hmm.
is this dwarf woman who turns and she shakes her head, no. Like, no, you fucked up. Like, I'm not. At one point in the film, he says, nothing is as it seems. And I think seeing is believing is another line that they keep throwing out. She pulls a knife out from her pocket and slashes him with it.
Yeah.
And you're going like, what the fuck just happened? Like, this shit just got fucking, like, this shit escalated already. And earlier he had seen a vision of his wife with the two women on a boat, not a gondola, but a motorized boat on one of the canals, maybe the Grand Canal, the biggest one. And of course they end up on that boat for his funeral because now he's dead. Like, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting. Even the sex scene, which I was expecting it to be, because that's what you hear about. You're thinking like, this is the central fucking thing, that it's going to be all crazy. And
Yeah.
the sex scene wasn't even.
No, it was sex. It wasn't acrobatic. It wasn't overly romantic. No. It wasn't.
And it didn't even. And it didn't look like necessarily that it was real. I mean, some of the angles I'm looking at it, and some of the angles look like, okay, that looks like it could have been like they were actually having sex. You know, some films you see them and you're like, this does not look like sex. It looked like they barely want to pretend they're having sex. But I don't know that. I don't even know where the story comes from that it was actual sex.
Because at the time in which it was made, sex scenes weren't as explicit as this. Number one, there were two things about it. You didn't see them both naked in bed in the manner in which this occurs. And you don't see...
You mean, that when I want to be clear. You're saying normally you wouldn't see two actors in bed the way they're shown here in this film.
A lot of times they would be under the sheet. You might grab a glimpse of a breast or his chest, but you wouldn't see, the sheet would be covering the lower half of their body. But also, she's going down on him, he's going down on her. You would never see that in a film. You would never see that kind of thing in a film, especially in 1973. Even now, you rarely see it. I mean, I can only think of maybe a handful of times where Viggo Mortensen going down on Maria Bello in A History of Violence. That's the only time that I can think of, especially a man going down on a woman. If you really think about what you've seen in films, you rarely see that.
Bonnie and Clyde has that, right?
Bonnie and Clyde, I think it does. I can't remember.
Because I'm thinking of and these are all kind of relatively within. Bonnie and Clyde is like mid to late 60s.
Well, Bonnie and Clyde 68.
Yeah, Last Tango is probably what year is this film? This film is 73.
This is 73.
Tango is like 71 or 72.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of uncommon. Was this X-rated or not?
No, it wasn't X-rated, but it was. I think the other thing that a lot of people protested it, but I think the fact that it was a British film gave it a little bit of credibility. If it had been an American film and they were doing this, there would have been a problem. The censors probably would have got in there with the scissors because I don't know. There's something about the European artistic sensibility that can sell. You got to remember that in the 60s and the 70s, European films, there were a lot of European pornographic films that were shown in theaters, and they could get away with it because they were considered art films.
Yeah.
Whereas American films couldn't do that.
The European sense of the body is also
much different.
Yeah, much different. If you have cultures that with a history of mythology and visual arts depicting the naked body in a way that isn't seen as pornographic, it's just seen as the naked body. And you have a tradition where you can go into museums and I mean, here you can go into museums too, but it's like American culture is not about that. American culture, the body is to put on a magazine cover.
Look,
that's what the body is for.
If they were to tour Michelangelo's David and they brought him over here and they first stop was Florida, you don't think they'd put a fucking cloak on him? They're that fucking ridiculous. Well, they'd give him a skirt or something. They'd give him a toga just to fucking, because they're that ridiculous.
No, that's a dress. That's a dress. That's some woke trans shit. That's what they would say to that.
Now you're getting insulting. Now you're being a little bit insulting. You insulted him a little bit.
A big Trumpian dick on it, and then they would cover it.
Yeah, they would.
But they would cover it, and then over the cover they would put a gun to represent the big dick. It would be an AR-15, and then it's like, okay, because now he can take on the Goliath of wokeness.
Mm-hmm. He's fighting for all of us.
This is a different tradition that we have in this country.
Absolutely.
It's not a tradition where artists are, in France, there have been artists and poets who have gotten out of jail terms, or they've been because they're artists, where it's like, no, look what this person has done for humanity. No, this is here business people get off, not fucking artists. So this is not that kind of culture. In Europe, you can have commercials with women topless, and it's not seen as like, oh, that's lewd or that's sex or that's whatever. It's this is just the body. Obviously, it's not the same in every country, and it's not the same because whether it's Protestantism or Catholicism, there still might be that like imposition, but at the same time, there's more of a conversation that's happening versus here our culture is like the conservatism is a certain type of conservatism, and then the sex stuff is to sell it. So
I agree.
It's very different. Very, very different.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's like, the controversy over the scene is that how explicit it was for the time, but it wasn't. Yeah. And then the legend of it being actual sex between the two people, and everybody involved has come out and said it wasn't. It was, first of all, they were catching. They shot it on the fly. They snuck into a hotel they had. They had a camera. There's no sound. There's no sync sound. The camera was incredibly loud, and they were doing it in 4 or 5 second shots, Nicholas Roeg would say, "Okay, Donald, move up here. Um, Julie, move your head back. Turn your chin this way." I mean, it was a heavily directed scene that they did, and they got what they needed. And Sutherland and Christie were both very they were both very uncomfortable at the time because sex scenes are tough. But it was movie sex. It wasn't pornography. It definitely wasn't pornography. There are no money shots. There are no penetration shots. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah, right.
it's the camera is moving in such a way that you can vaguely see what's going on, but it's not. They're your mind is making up a lot of the story there, which is it's a very powerful um, storytelling methodology, whatever you want to call it. Um, but I think Nicholas Roeg understands. I mean, sex scenes for the most part are unnecessary in films. This one is so powerful within the story because it is the coming together of two people who have been unable to love one another, who have been unable to really deal with the struggles of the past year, the past few years. And I thought it was really beautifully done. I really thought it was the type of thing where it added to the story. It really pushed it forward, and it was necessary. And I don't think the film would work as well without it. And it's not because you or I want to see Julie Christie naked. She's a lovely woman, but that's not she. It's not. This is not the Julie Christie from Shampoo, or the sex symbol. This is not the sex symbol Julie Christie that we knew from the 1970s. If
Yeah,
that makes sense,
it's different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different. It's
For
not.
me,
Yeah.
I think of sex when I think of sex scenes in film. I don't think of it in terms of whether it's necessary or not to tell a story. And also remember that I'm not as married to the story as like
Yeah,
you're more you want more of the story.
I do always,
I
almost always. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily interested in that. I just want to see I want to see a world. Um, I want to be shown a world.
Hmm.
And so to me, sex in a film is like I don't put it in. It's not like this is one piece that one stepping stone in order to get to the next thing. When I see sex, it's showing. I'm seeing how these characters are in the world. I'm seeing how they are in relation to other people because it's elemental. These are things obviously that human beings do. We eat, we defecate, we sleep, we all of these different things, and a lot of times you don't see people using the restroom in a film. It's skipped over. But when, for example, let's say Gaspar Noé, he shows sex scenes, and someone might say, "Well, why is he just doing this for shock? Is he doing this for because he's a pervert? What's his thing?" I think he's getting at these different elemental aspects of life, these different themes that touch on that encircle us: birth, death, life, sex, food, rage, blood, milk, cum, all of these different things. And so it's kind of it's like in a dream. These things manifest in dreams because they're so elemental to us. So to me, it's like, yeah, you see how people have sex or don't or whatever, and it's showing you their place in the universe at that particular time, and it reveals character. When Sharon Stone is like on top, that means something. Obviously, it doesn't always have to mean something. In that film, in Basic Instinct, it is very specific and very much meant to mean something. It is meant to mean dominance. But it can mean something. So in terms of the subversion of expectations, I like the fact that I had this big old expectation of this scene that was supposed to be so lurid and so whatever, and it just wasn't.
No.
And the money shot is actually when Donald Sutherland dies. That's the money shot of the film. That I was like, so this film totally came out of left field to me.
Well, it does subvert expectations. I mean, but that's our 2023 sensibility versus, this movie is about 40 years old. No, 50 years old.
That it didn't subvert expectations back then
in a different way.
In a different way.
In a much different way. Sadly, we're very jaded by the films that we have seen up until this point. This is
well, then that means that it subverted them even more.
Yes,
all the more to us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's even a greater compliment to the film.
It is, but it's also it's one of those things where you can't watch it with the sensibility of what you think a film should be right now, and it's impossible to not. You have to go into a film understanding that. And the simple recognition and the understanding that you have to do that lends to the fact that it will play itself out in that manner while you're watching it. A part of it is your modern day sensibility in watching something from 1973. You have to retrain yourself as you're watching it. So it's there are certain things about it that are very 73. I don't think it's a dated film. I think it's very, except for the fact that you see it, I don't think it's a dated film. I don't think it's there's costuming and there's hairstyles, and the fact that Donald Sutherland is much younger in this film than you see him now, and Julie Christie is there's all of that, and you can't watch a film without. I mean, I'm seeing Donald Sutherland on the bench with Kevin Costner and JFK. I'm seeing him, in Space Cowboys. I'm watching Julie Christie in I guess the last Potter film is one of the last things that I saw her in. So it's very different. It's there's a change in your. This is not like going to see Oppenheimer. This is not like seeing something that's a contemporary film or something, or even something within our lifetime. It's not like watching. I don't know. It's like
I don't know what you mean.
I don't know. I don't know what I mean. That's the confusing part. I have an idea, but I don't know how to articulate it right now. It's just that it's
Well, it's not from my lifetime, but yeah.
Well, it's not from my lifetime either. It's before me. It's the year before.
It's contemporary enough to you, and like I was born at the end of the 70s. It's born. Yes, I get what you mean in terms of now, like the actual years of it, but it's not like beyond the fucking realm of it's not like a silent film.
Well, this is not like watching Metropolis. This is not like watching Buster Keaton. This is But
feels to me young. It feels young enough. It feels recent enough to me that I can, when I'm like, wait a minute, no, actually, it is beyond my lifetime. But it feels close enough that it's like, I get it. It's a '70s movie, but it's not like what makes it strange is that it's in its own time. What it does with time makes it in its own weird timeline. But at the same time, you're like, well, yeah, but it is a '70s film.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, I think it subverts expectations because it's its own thing. It looks recognizable,
Mm-hmm.
but it does things in a way that are unique to itself.
Yeah.
You know that it's doing horror, thriller type stuff, but it's like a magic trick. It's using misdirection. You're waiting for the moment where the trick happens, and while you're looking for that, the trick actually happens. And you're like, wait, what the fuck?
Yeah. Well, I like also that it doesn't go out of its way to explain too much. Like it never, when their son becomes ill back in England or wherever, I'm not really sure. And
Yeah.
Julie Christie flies back, and then he sees her on a passing boat with the two sisters, and she's dressed in black. You do feel like something is that he's being fucked with, that there's something nefarious going on.
Yeah.
And as it leads forward, and this is one of those moments where, I was reminded of Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys and the source material, La Jetée.
Mm-hmm.
Keith Fulton's La Jetée. You see a man not see his death. You're seeing a man see his own funeral. And he can't register that. The only way it plays out is that that's my wife. She's supposed to be in England looking after our son. What the fuck is going on? And then he goes on this race towards to figure things out, to find out what's going on, to go after these two women who he believes are I don't know if he believes that they're con women or they're
Right.
they're manipulating his wife. But not until the very end do you realize, oh my God, this was a man that was seeing his own funeral. That was creepy. It was Roeg just puts it out there. It's there,
Mm-hmm.
and it solves itself later. It's I thought that was really great. I thought that was powerful. The only thing that I really didn't like about this film was the turning of that red hooded, the scene where Donald Sutherland is murdered underneath
Mm-hmm.
the city. I don't think we should have seen who murdered him.
Mm.
I think that should have been left ambiguous because I didn't like it was kind of that's where they're going with it moment for me. I thought it was a little bit too scare tactic in a film that had avoided scare tactic up until that point. What was your opinion on
Yeah.
that?
Okay.
What did you think?
I didn't think of it as a kind of like, oh, they did this,
Yeah.
they didn't do that, or they didn't do that, so they did this. It was just like that's what it was. I didn't know what it could have been anything at that point because of the multiplicity of possibilities. But that's where it went with it, and it was just so. Is it a little girl that she's going to turn, and does he finally see like the specter of his daughter? But no, he sees an old woman.
Mm-hmm. A dwarf.
Yeah, and it just kind of like makes no sense.
It just didn't work for me. Yeah.
That's how it made sense to me. You know what I mean? It's just like that's what it was, and I just accepted it. That's what it was.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying in terms of, well, okay, this feels like this.
Yeah.
So it didn't bother me the way I think it like threw you out or whatever.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
But
I wish I were you on that end. I wish I could have been happier with that.
Just gone with it. Just let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but it's a testament to how good the rest of the film is and how well everything else works in it. But it's that one shot when you see that old face, when you see what it is, and it's creepy as fuck. But it doesn't work within the context of the story for me. I just think that to see the body move, the blade come out, and then him get cut, I thought would have been a hell of a lot more effective, and would have hit me harder than what he actually does. It's the only real point in the story where I feel disappointed, where I feel like, and it's not a cop out. It's not. It's not introducing something that hasn't already been alluded to in the story, because you already know that there's a serial killer. You know that, but it was too pat for me.
Yeah.
And it didn't look right.
Yeah, you don't know that the serial killer is an old lady who's trapping people by having them think it's a girl.
Yeah.
And then, by seeing that, you're like, oh, so that's this killer's tactic. Okay. So, yeah. It even in that sense, by having that one moment kind of disappoint you, it's averted your expectations, because I don't think you were expecting to be disappointed by it. You know what I mean? Like, so old Mr. Roeg does it again.
Well, they get me back. They get me back when I see the They got me back when I saw the funeral scene play out again, and it's you mentioned Tarantino. You mentioned Pulp Fiction. I don't think that plays in the same way as this does. Tarantino fucks with the timeline in order to subvert the audience and catch them off guard. This doesn't do that. This goes back to Eisenstein, where the whole idea of editing commenting on itself, flashbacks. So there's it's not a fucking with timeline. I don't think it's fucking with the timeline. I think it's which is not what I'm saying that you're saying, but I think it's different and a little bit more powerful, because it's the characters reflecting on the past, and in some ways it's us being hit with the parallel going on of their lives. Sex, preparation. Sex after sex going on with their lives.
Yeah.
The moment of him seeing his daughter, seeing his wife, going back when they talk about in that moment of death, you see your life flash before your eyes. It's a cliche, but it works in this type of situation. A lot of that.
I mean, that goes back to fucking Gaspar Noé.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to the back and forth that we were having between Into the Void and fucking the
Jacob's Ladder.
Jacob's Ladder, yeah.
Yeah. I think you're looking at a really exceptional film. And if you want to see how it's been adapted or stolen from, look at Danny Boyle's work, look at a little bit of Tarantino, but really look at Soderbergh. There's a lot, and Soderbergh will say straight out, I stole blatantly from Don't Look Now and Nicholas Roeg's work, and you can see a lot of it in the sex scene in Out of Sight between George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. It's cut in a lot like this. The limey is him going overboard in a very good way, in a way that I really like, and that is directly influenced by this. So that's a film that we have to, those are both films that we have to go over at some point. And we have to go back to Soderbergh. We've only ever done one Soderbergh film, I think. So it's going to be interesting to dive into his work. Because there's a lot there. We did Sex, Lies, and Video. Mm-hmm. But we still have Traffic, Out of Sight. We have.
We did that recent film with Don Cheadle.
Oh yes. No Surrender. No, I can't remember what it was called. But we did another one too. Oh, during the.
I talked about his Solaris, but I don't think we.
No, Solaris is. Oh no, we didn't do that one. We that was the Tarkovsky. No, the pandemic one.
Yeah.
Contagion. We did Contagion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's when I saw you last time.
Yeah.
The last time I saw you.
The last time we saw each other 4 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever. This much I'll say. If you listen to this podcast in order to find... You're listening to this podcast for one or two reasons, I imagine. To hear people's opinions on films that you know and you love, or to help you discover films that you didn't know existed. I think Don't Look Now falls into the category of films that a lot of people just don't know, either don't know exist, or have heard about and have never had the opportunity to seek out. I can tell you straight out, this is one worth looking at. It's worth going out there, finding it, and throwing it on. If you love movies, this is one that will deliver, and I think everybody who listens to us would agree. So that's the episode. We want to say thank you for everybody for listening, and please, if you get a chance, if you like what we're doing, if you appreciate what we consider intelligent, thoughtful conversation about cinema and culture and art, please go to buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos and donate whatever you can. Whatever you can give, go into the pockets, go into the wallet, and just throw it out there. And it's just a matter of helping us out a little bit. Of course, this is a labor of love, but a couple of bucks here and there are always appreciated. Mr. Chavez, do you have anything left to say?
Keep watching.
Very succinct.
Don't stop.
Don't stop. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You have a great week. Bye-bye now.